Lyddie by Katherine Paterson, Chapter 16, Fever. Taking the money from the bank was like having a rooted tooth yanked from her jaw. Then, the most painful part past, she pressed $2 whole into Miss Bedloe's hand before going out on the town to buy Rachel shoes and shawl and to order a dress made for her. Having spent that much, Lyddie squandered 50 pence more to get the child a beginning reader and a small paper volume of verses that the bookseller recommended. All told, Lyddie had spent more than 2 weeks' wages. There was less than $1 in her pocket now left from the princely sum she had withdrawn. She tried not to think on it. It was for Rachel, wasn't it? How could she begrudge the child? The very next day, Bridget was slower than ever, and it was all that Lyddie could do to keep from screaming. Time after time she took the shuttle from the girl's clumsy hands, sucked the thread through from the bobbin, and threw it into the race, raging that a machine should stand idle for even a few seconds. Bridget was on the brink of tears all day. At last Lyddie exploded when once again the girl's inattention caused a snarl and a ruined peace. "You must mind, girl," she shouted. "Forget everything else but the loom." "But I canna forget," Bridget cried out. "Me mother's sick unto death, and no money for a doctor. Here." She snatched all the change from her apron pocket and stuffed it into Bridget's. "Here, that's for the doctor. Now mind the machine, eh?" The next few days went better than those before. She coaxed a few words from Rachel and the suggestion of a smile when she read aloud from the book of verses. Dr. Foster went to Gloucester in a shower of rain. He stepped in a puddle right up to his middle and never went there again. "Well," said Lyddie, "that's mud season in Vermont, eh?" And Rachel smiled. Encouraged, Lyddie tried to make a rhyme for Rachel herself. "Uncle Judah went to Bermuda in the April rain. He sunk in the ooze right up to his snooze and never was heard of again." This time there was no mistaking the smile. Work was going better as well. Bridget was pathetically grateful for her gift. She beat Lyddie to work in the mornings and had 2 of the machines oiled and gleaming before Lyddie even entered the room. Mr. Marsden was very pleased. By Thursday he smiled across the room continually. Lyddie resolved not to glance his way, but she could see without looking the little rosebud mouth fixed in its prissy bow. How hot the room seemed. Of course it was always hot and steamy, but somehow, perhaps if she hadn't been burning up she could have kept her head, but she was so hot, so exhausted that Thursday in May, she wasn't prepared. She had no defenses. He stopped her and made her wait until everyone had gone. Just when she felt she must lie down or faint, he stopped her and put both his fat white hands heavily on either sleeve, dragging his weight on her arms. He was saying something as well, but her head was pounding and she couldn't make it out. What did he want with her? She had to go. She had to see Rachel. Her whole body was on fire. She needed a cool cloth for her head, and yet he kept holding on to her. She tried to stare him down, but her eyes were burning in their sockets. "Let me go," she wanted to cry. She tried to pull back from him, but he clutched tighter. He was bringing his strange little mouth closer and closer to her fiery face. She murmured something about not feeling well, but it made his eyes grow soft and his arm go all around her shoulder. What made her do it? Illness? Desperation? She'd never know, but she raised her booted foot and stomped her heel down with all her might. He gave a cry, and dropping his arms, doubled over. It was all the time she needed. She stumbled down the stairs and across the yard, nearly falling at last into the door of number 5. He had not tried to follow. She did not go to work the next day or for many days thereafter. Her fever raged, and she was out of her mind with it. Once she realized that someone was putting a cold cloth on her forehead, and she raised her arm to bring it down over her burning eyelids. A tiny cool hand rested on her hot one and stroked it timidly. Somewhere at a great distance she heard a small voice croon, "There, there," and then her heavy arm was lifted and put back gently under the quilt. Dr. Morris was summoned. She tried to protest. She couldn't waste money on doctors. But if the words came out at all, they came out too thickly for anyone to understand. The bell rang, but it was far away now. It no longer rang for her. People came in and out of the darkened room. Sometimes Miss Bedloe was spooning broth into her, sometimes another of the boarders. Diana was there, and Bridget, though who would have sent for them? Bridget had brought some Irish concoction that Miss Bedloe seemed to be trying to refuse, but the girl would not leave until she had been allowed to spoon some of it into the patient's mouth. And always, whenever Lyddie swam up the fiery pool out into consciousness, she knew that Rachel was there beside her. "She'll get sick," Lyddie tried to protest. "Make her go away, or move me to the infirmary. She's too frail." But either she never got the words out, or no one could or would understand, for whenever she was in her right mind, Rachel was there. She woke one morning with a start. The bell was clanging, banging away at her dully aching head. She sat up abruptly. The room swooped and dipped about her. More slowly she swung her legs over the side of the bed, but when she tried to stand, she fell over like a newborn calf. "Rachel," she called, "help me. I gotta go to work." Rachel raised up from the other bed. "You're awake," she cried. "Lyddie, you didn't die." She fell back onto her pillow. "No," she said weakly. "Not yet. We can still hop." Chapter 17, Doffer. It had been 2 weeks since she fell ill, and Dr. Morris still refused to let her return to work. Her mind roared protest, but her legs could hardly carry her to the privy. Her body had never betrayed her before. She despised its weakness, and every day she heard the first bell and ordered herself up and dressed, but she would only be up a few minutes, not even through washing herself at the basin, before the sweat broke out on her forehead from the effort, and she was obliged to let Rachel help her back to bed. There was too much time in bed. She slept, and still there were hours awake to worry when her mind skimple-scombled back on itself like threads in a snarled loom. Why hadn't Charlie written? She should have heard from him long ago. Perhaps her letter had been lost. That was it. She sat straight up. "Better rest, Lyddie." Rachel was there as always. The doctor said, "Get me some paper and my pen and ink from the box there, the little one on top of the bandbox. I must write Charlie again." Rachel obeyed, but even as she handed Lyddie the writing materials, she protested. "You ain't supposed to worry, Lyddie. Doctor said." Lyddie put her hand on Rachel's head. Her hair was soft as goose down. "It's all right, Rachie. I'm much better, eh? Nearly all well now." Rachel's brow furrowed, but her eyes were clear, not the dead blank eyes of her arrival. Lyddie stroked her hair. "I had me such a good nurse, I couldn't have believed it." Rachel smiled and nodded at the writing box. "Tell Charlie," she said. "I'll be sure to," Lyddie said. "He'll be monstrous proud." By the next week she was feeling truly ready to go back to work and remembering with every breath her last act at the factory. Merciful heavens! There was probably no work to go back to. Had she really? Had she truly stomped on Mr. Marsden's foot with her boot heel? She hardly knew whether to laugh or cry. She sent a note to Bridget. Most of the girls were wary of speaking to Diana under Mr. Marsden's nose, asking her and Diana to stop over after supper. That evening both Diana and Bridget came as she hoped. Bridget brought more soup from her now fully recovered mother and a half bottle of Dr. Rush's infallible health pills. "Me mother swears by them," she said, blushing. Diana handed Lyddie a paper-bound book, American Notes for General Circulation, by Mr. Charles Dickens. "Since you're such an admirer of the gentleman, I thought you might like to see what he wrote about factory life in Lowell," she said. "I suppose he was comparing us to the satanic mills of England. Anyhow, it's a bit romantical, as they say." "A book by Mr. Dickens. How did you know?" "My dear, anyone who copies a book out page by page and pastes it to her frame." Lyddie sent Rachel and Bridget down to beg a cup of tea from Mrs. Bedloe. "Diana, I got to ask you, has Mr. Marsden said anything of me?" "Well, of course. He missed you at once. You're his best girl." Lyddie felt her face go crimson. "I told him I'd ask after you. That's when I learned how ill you were. A lot of the girls have been out with this fever, especially the Irish. There have been many deaths in the acre." Lyddie looked away, out the tiny, dirty window of the bedroom. "Thank you, God. How could I leave my baby girl?" Diana reached over from where she was sitting on the edge of the other bed and put her hand lightly on Lyddie's arm. "I'm grateful you were spared, Lyddie," she said softly. Lyddie pressed her lips together and gave a little nod. "I reckon I'm too ornery to die." "I wouldn't be surprised." Can you remember just what Mr. Marsden said when he asked about me?" "He didn't speak directly to me. He doesn't like to think that you and I are friends, you know. But I know he was worried. He wouldn't want to lose you. So I still got a place?" Diana looked at her as though she were crazy. "Why on earth not?" "I stomped his foot." "You what?" "I was all a fever, only I didn't know, and he tried to hold me after the rest had gone. He wouldn't let me go, so I stomped down on his foot." Diana threw her head back and laughed out loud. "It ain't a joke. He'll have my place for it." "No, no," she said, trying to recover. "No," she said, taking out her handkerchief and wiping her eyes. "No, I don't think so. He's probably more frightened than you are. Have you ever seen Ms. Overseer Marsden, Lyddie? If word ever got to that august lady—" She stopped laughing and lowered her voice, her ear cocked toward the open door. "Nonetheless, I wouldn't make attacking the overseer a regular practice, my dear. Do be more discreet in the future. That is, if you want to stay on at the corporation. The day may come when Mr. Marsden would welcome any excuse to let you go." She smiled wryly. "It sounds as though I'm advising you not to sign any petitions or consort with any known radicals. But maybe he meant nothing. I was burnt up with the fever. Maybe I mistook kindness for... She grimaced. "You know, I'm not that kind of girl men look at that way. I'm plain as plowed sod." Diana raised an eyebrow, but Rachel and Bridget were at the door with the tea, so she said nothing more. "I'll pretend," thought Lyddie, as she tried to unsnarl her brain over the steaming cup. "I'll pretend I was crazy from the fever and didn't know what I was doing. Can't even remember what I did." "I want to be a doffer, Lyddie," Rachel said. Lyddie had brushed her sister's curls and was weaving them into plaits. Rachel wanted to pin her hair up like the big girls in the house, but Lyddie insisted that the braids hang down. She couldn't bear for Rachel to look like a funny little make-believe woman. "Bridget says her little sister is a doffer, and she's no bigger than me." "Oh, Rachel, you need to go to school." She loved to braid Rachel's hair, but was suddenly ashamed that she had only string to bind it with. She should have splurged on a bit of ribbon. Rachel was so pretty for all her being too thin. She ought to have bright bows to set off the two silky curls at the end of each plait. They would brighten her drab little dress, but ribbons cost money, and string bound the hair just as well. She twisted each curl around her index finger and gave it a final brush. "We got to get you into school. You don't want to grow ignorant as your Lyddie." "You ain't ignorant at all. I seed you read." "You want I should read to you, Rachie?" "No, I want you should let me be a doffer." "We'll have to wait and see, when we hear from Charlie." But they didn't hear from Charlie. They heard from Quaker Stevens. "Dear Sister Worthen, thy brother asked me to look into the sale of thy farm. All inquiry has come to naught, but as I have business in thy uncle's neighborhood on Wednesday next, I will inquire directly at that time. I trust thee and the little one are in good health. Son Luke asks to be remembered to thee. Thy friend and neighbor, Jeremiah Stevens." She tried not to feel angry at Charlie for not writing to her himself. He had, after all, done the sensible thing. To the law and their uncle they were only children. Judah would have to listen to Quaker Stevens. He was a man of substance. She was glad to know that Luke had gotten safely home. She had finally realized that the freight he had come to fetch was human. The letter meant, though, that she could wait no longer. Something would have to be done about Rachel. The promised fortnight had passed, and she must go back to work herself on the morrow. She sent Rachel to the bedroom, stuffed the letter in her apron pocket, and went into the kitchen. She didn't start with the request, but with an offer of help to fix dinner. Miss Bedloe was always grateful for an extra hand in the kitchen, even though the house was now down to only 20 girls. "You give me more than the fortnight, Miss Bedloe, and I am obliged," she said, once the cabbage had been chopped and the bread sliced. "You are near to death, Lyddie. I'm not without heart." "Indeed not," Lyddie smiled as warmly as she knew how. "You've been more'n good to me and mine, which is why I dare. It won't do, you know. I can't keep her on indefinitely. But if she was a doffer, she's hardly more than a baby. She's small, but she's a worker. Didn't she nurse me, She pulled you through. I wouldn't have warranted it. Could you ask the agent for me? Just until I got things set with my brother. All I want to do is take her home. It wouldn't be for long, I swear. Meantime, I've not the heart to set her out with strangers." Miss Bedloe was weakening. Lyddie could read it in the sag of her face. She pressed on eagerly. "It won't be more than a few weeks, and I'd pay extra. I would. I know it's hard for you with only 20 girls here regular. I'll speak to the agent, but I can't promise you." I know, but if you'll just ask for me. She's a fine little worker, and so eager to make good." "I can't promise anything. Would you go now and ask?" "Now? I'm in the middle of fixing dinner." "I'll finish for you, please, so I can take her over when I go back to work tomorrow." It was arranged. Lyddie suspected that Miss Bedloe had added a few years and several pounds in her description of Rachel to the agent, but a skeptical look was all she got from the overseer on the spinning floor when she presented Rachel for work the next morning, and Rachel looked so bright and eager and smiled so sweetly that even the skeptical look melted, and she was sent skipping down the aisle to meet the other doffers under the care of a kindly middle-aged spinner. Slowly, Lyddie climbed the flight of stairs to the weaving room. Her worry for Rachel had pushed aside, for a time, her own fears of seeing Mr. Marsden again. She didn't dare look in his direction, but went straight to her looms, where Bridget was already at work, cleaning and oiling. "You're looking much the rosier," Bridget said. How pretty the girl was, with her light brown hair and eyes clear blue as a bright February sky after snow. It was the smile, though, that transformed her into a real beauty. Lyddie smiled back. She did not envy other women their good looks, and even if she had been so inclined, she would never begrudge this bounty of nature to one so poor in everything else. "We covered the machines as best we could while you were gone, me and Diana, though," she smiled apologetically, "you'll see from your wage, the work was not near what it would be, had you been here." It was all they had time to say before Mr. Marsden stepped on a stool and pulled the cord that set the room to roaring and shaking. Lyddie jumped, then laughed. How quickly she'd forgotten the noise. Within minutes she had settled in and forgotten everything else. Mr. Marsden, her weakness, the farm, Charlie, even Rachel. It was good to be back with her beasts again. She belonged among them somehow. By the breakfast bell she was almost too tired to eat. She would, if she could have chosen, sat out the break in the window alcove, but that would leave her alone on the floor. She glanced at Mr. Marsden and hurried toward the stairs. He didn't speak to her. It was as if nothing had occurred between them, except that he never came over to her loom to pat and encourage her, not once. She managed to eat breakfast, or some of it. Rachel was stuffing herself like a regular factory girl, talking excitedly at the same time. She stopped only to look at Lyddie and say through her full mouth, "Eat, Lyddie, you got to eat and grow strong." So it was she got through breakfast and dinner, but by supper she could only manage a few bites of stew before she dragged herself up to bed. Fatigue was like a toothache in her bones. She would have cursed her weakness had she the strength. Each day, though, she was a little stronger. At first she could not feel it, no more than a body can feel itself grow taller, but by the end of the week she found that she had eaten a full plate at supper and was lingering in the parlor with Rachel, who was watching, fascinated as a phrenologist sought to sell his services to the girls. "Please, Lyddie," Rachel begged, "let's have our heads done." "I know about my head, Rachel. Why should I pay good money to find out it's plain as sod and stubborn as a mule? And such a skinflint a penny would freeze to your fists before you'd spend it," the phrenologist snapped. "I'd give you that reading for free. Not that there's hope you'd pay." The other girls in the parlor tittered. Even Lyddie tried to smile, but Rachel was indignant. "She's not mean. She's going to buy me ribbons," she declared. "Come on, Lyddie," she added, taking her hand. "Let's go read the book you bought me." The girls laughed again, but more gently. They had never cared much for Lyddie, whom they knew to be close with her money and her friendships, but Rachel was rapidly becoming their pet. How dry her life had been before Rachel came. It was like springs of water in the desert to have her here. She kissed her head that night before she tucked her in. "You don't think your Lyddie is a cheap old spinster, eh?" Rachel was furious all over again. "You're the best sister in the world." Lyddie blew out the candle. She lay listening to Rachel's even breathing and heard in her memory the sounds of birds in the spring woods. If only she could hear from Charlie, Lyddie's happiness would be complete. The money was growing again. She had nearly caught up with the wages lost by her illness, and even though Rachel made only a pittance, it paid her room and board. She had seldom been happier. She woke in the night puzzled. She thought she had heard Betsy again, that wretched hacking sound that sawed through her rib cage straight into her heart, and then she was wide awake and knew it to be Rachel. It was only a cold. Surely it was nothing. She would be over it in a week. See, the child seemed bright-eyed and lively as ever. If she were sick, really sick. Lyddie kept the knowledge of the night cough tight inside herself, but the fear grew like a tumor. She began to lie awake, listening for the awful sound, until finally she knew she must send the child away, anywhere, just so she was not breathing this poison air. "It'll break my heart to send the child away." Lyddie could not bear the thought. It might break Rachel's heart as well. She has been sent away too often in her short life. Look, she dotes on me, tough and mean as I be. She clings to me more than she ever did our mother. She needs me. Lyddie did not know what to do, and she was too terrified to ask. No one must know. She fed Rachel the pills Bridget had brought her. She had no faith in them, but she must try. She fixed plasters for the child's chest, trying to turn it into a game, desperate to hide her own terror. And she was succeeding, wasn't she? Rachel seemed happy as ever and carefree as a kitten. Caught in a spasm of coughing, she made light of it. "Silly cough," she said. "All the girls have them." Lyddie mustn't worry. Summer was here. The weather was warm. Rachel would be over it soon. They'd take July off, go back to the farm, the two of them. But it was a vain dream, Lyddie knew. There would be nothing to eat there. The cow was gone and no crops planted. Tryphena. She would send Rachel to Tryphena. But Tryphena meant Mistress Cutler as well as that lonely, airless attic. How could she do to Rachel at 8 what her mother had done to her at 13? It had been hard even then, and so very lonely. She hadn't realized how lonely until now that she was no longer alone. Then one evening in late June, she had just read Rachel to sleep. Tim knocked on the door. "A visitor for you, Lyddie," he said, "in the parlor." Chapter 18. Charlie at Last. She hardly knew him. He was not so much taller, but bigger somehow, foreign. He wore homespun, but it was well tailored to his body. His brown hair was combed neatly against his head, and a carpet bag hung from his right hand. "Sister," he said quietly, and the voice was one she had never heard before and would not have known for his. "Sister," he repeated, his voice cracking on the words. "It's me, Charles." "Yes," she said, "Charles. So you come." He smiled then. She looked in vain for the funny, serious little boy she knew. He wasn't 13 yet. How could he have discarded that little child so quickly? He glanced around the crowded room. All the staring faces quickly dived back into their sewing or knitting or conversation. "I took the railroad car," he said in quiet pride, "the stage into New Hampshire, to Concord, and then all the rest of the way by train." Then he grinned like a child, but not the child she remembered. Not quite. She didn't know what to say. She cared nothing for railroads, those dangerous, dirty things. It was the farm she ached to know about. "Well," she said at last, "you must be tired, eh?" She cast about the parlor for 2 free chairs. At her glance, 3 girls rose and abandoned theirs in the far corner of the room beyond the dining tables. She thanked them and led him over. It was she who felt the need to sit. "Well," she said, arranging her apron on her lap. "Well, then?" It was as much of a question as she could manage. "I got good news, Lyddie," he said, a little of the boy she knew creeping into his voice. Her heart rose. "The Finneys have taken me on as full apprentice." "Eh?" "More than that, truly. They treat me like their own. They don't have no child but me." "You got a family," she said faintly. "You'll always be my sister, Lyddie. I don't forget that. It's just—" He put the carpet bag on the floor and laid his cap carefully on top. His hands were big now, too large for his body. Finally, he looked up at her. "It's just, I don't have to worry every morning when I get up and every night when I lie abed. I just do my work. And every day, 3 times, the food is there. When the work is slack, I go to school. It's a good life they give me, Lyddie." She wanted to scream out at him, remind him how hard she had worked for him, how hard she had tried, but she only said softly, "I wanted to do for you, Charlie. I tried." "Oh, Lyddie, I know," he said, leaning toward her. "I know. But it weren't fair to you. You only a girl trying to be father and mother and sister to us all. It were too much. This'll be best for you too, eh? Don't you see?" "No," she wanted to howl. "No. What'll be the use of me, then?" But she kept her lips pressed together against such a cry. At last she said, "There's Rachel." He smiled again, his grown-up smile that turned him into a stranger. "I have good news there, too. Miss Finney asked me to bring Rachel back. She craves a daughter as well, and she'll be so good to her, you'll see. She even sent a dress. She made it herself for Rachel to wear on the train, with a bonnet even." His eyes went to the carpet bag beside the chair. "She's never had a proper ma, Rachel. She has me. Oh, Charlie, I ain't perfect, but I do my best. Can't you see? I done my best for you. She's all I got left now. How can I let her go?" But even as she stormed within herself, she knew she had no choice. Like the rusty blade through her heart, she felt it. If she stays here with me, she will die. If I cling to her, I will be her death. She heard her own voice, calm as morning after a storm, no, quiet as death, say, "When will you be leaving?" "The train leaves Lowell at 5 minutes after 7 of the morning. I'll come to fetch her at 6:30. I'll have her ready before I go to work." She stood. There was nothing more to be said. He stood too, cap in hand, wanting, she knew, to say more, but not knowing quite how. She waited. "About the farm," he began. The farm. A few minutes before she had thought it was all she cared about. Now it had ceased to matter. "Uncle Judah's bound and determined to sell." Lyddie nodded. "Well," she said, "so be it." He grinned wryly. For a man who says the Lord is set to end the whole creation at any minute, he's got a powerful concern for the vain things of this world. She realized he was trying to be funny, so she attempted a smile. "But I near forgot." He reached into an inside pocket and took out a sealed letter. Lyddie stared at it. "He ain't sending me money?" "Who? Uncle?" "Oh, no, not him. He says anything from the sale is rightly his for taking care of Ma and the babies all this time. No, this here is a letter." He handed it to her, studying her face the while. "From Luke." "Luke who?" "Lyddie, our friend Luke, our neighbor Luke Stevens." He seemed shocked. He couldn't know she was 2 lifetimes away from the day Luke had driven them to the village, and at least 1 lifetime from the day the Quaker boy had stood on the doorstep of number 5 in his peculiar disguise. She tucked the letter in her apron pocket. "Thank you," she said, "and goodbye, I reckon. I'll not be here in the morning when you come." "It'll be all right, Lyddie. It'll be best for us all, eh?" His voice was anxious. "It'll work out best for you as well." "You forgot your bag," she said. "No, that's for Rachel." He picked it up and handed it to her. He put out his hand as if to shake hers, but hers were tightly wrapped around the handle of the bag. She nodded instead. The next she saw him he would be taller than she, Lyddie thought, if there was a next time. She led him to the door. "Goodbye," she mouthed the words. She couldn't have spoken them aloud if she'd dared. She climbed the stairs like an old decrepit woman, clinging to the banister and pulling herself up step by step. Rachel was fast asleep. She would not wake her. In the candlelight she studied the lovely little face. Too thin, too pale, the skin nearly transparent. Lyddie brushed back a curl that had escaped its plait and smoothed it against Rachel's cheek. Any minute she would start to cough, her little body racked, the bed shaking. Miss Finney would keep her safe. She could go to school. She would have a good life, a real mother, and she will forget me, plain, rough, miserly Lyddie, who only bought her ribbons because she was shamed to it. Will she ever know how much I loved her, how I would have gladly laid down my life and died for her, how, oh Lord, I am dying this very minute for her? She took out the dress. It was a lovely sprigged muslin. It looked too big for Rachel's tiny frame, but the child would grow into it. She would lengthen and fatten and turn once again into a stranger. Lyddie's tears were soaking the dress. She wiped her face on her own apron skirt, then laid out the new garments. The frilly little bonnet with ribbons and lace, a petticoat fit for a wedding. A length of pink ribbon was woven in and out all around the top of the hem, wasted, pure waste, where no one would ever see it, except Rachie. She packed the bag. It took less than a minute. Rachel had so little. She remembered the primer and then decided to keep it. Rachel would have a new one, a better one now. She took the book of verses off the nightstand and shut it in the bag, then took it out again. She got her box of writing materials, dipped her pen in the ink, and wrote in painful, careful script on the flyleaf, "For Rachel Worthen, from her sister Lydia Worthen, June 24, 1846. Wiping her face carefully on her apron as she wrote so as not to blot the page. She lay awake most of the night listening to Rachel cough, the sound rasping and sawing through her own body, but the pain of it was her salvation. She knew if she had ever doubted before, she was absolutely certain that Rachel must leave Lowell. When the first bell rang, instead of waking Rachel as usual, she waited until she herself was dressed and ready to go. Then she shook her gently. Rachel awoke at once, alarmed. "I'm late. Why did you let me sleep?" "You got a treat today, Rachie. Charlie's come to fetch you." "Charlie? My brother Charlie?" She was excited as if she could really remember him. Lyddie brushed away a cobweb of envy. "He's come to take you for a visit." "He wants me to visit him?" She was plainly thrilled, but then she caught something in Lyddie's face. "You coming too, ain't you, Lyddie?" "No, not me. I gotta work, eh?" The child's face darkened. "I'll come later." She stretched out her hand. "Here, up you go. You got to get ready." Rachel took Lyddie's hand and pulled herself upright, then threw back the covers. The child always slept under a quilt, even in the terrible summer heat. "How long will I be gone, Lyddie?" "I don't rightly know. Me and Charlie, we both think you should stay a while. Make sure you get rid of that silly cough, eh? The factory is too hot in summer anyways. Lots of the girls take off come July." "Will you take off, Lyddie?" She was standing in her little night shift, scratching one leg with the bare toes of the other. "I just might. Who knows, eh?" Lyddie wrung out the cloth over the basin and handed it to Rachel to wash. "Come with me now, Lyddie. Over on the other bed is a new dress for you to put on. You got to dress fancy for riding on a train." "A railroad train?" "Luckiest girl I know. New dress and bonnet, train ride, holiday with a handsome man." She took the cloth from Rachel's hand, tipped up the child's chin, and began to wash her upturned face. "Now you learn your letters better so you can write me all about that train ride." The bell began to ring. She turned swiftly, wringing the cloth out over the basin, her face to the wall, lest she betray herself. "He'll be here to fetch you in an hour or so," she said brightly. "So get yourself dressed and go down and ask Miss Bedloe to give you an extra big breakfast." She turned only long enough to give Rachel a light kiss on the cheek and then hurried out the door. "Come soon, Lyddie." Rachel's voice followed her down the stairs. "I'll miss you." "Be a good girl for Charlie," she called back, and rushed on down the stairs with a great clatter to erase any more sounds, any more doubts. Rachel had been gone nearly a week when she found the letter with her name written on it in small, neat handwriting. She had stuffed it into her trunk some days before and couldn't remember at first where it had come from. She unsealed it curiously. "Dear Lyddie Worthen, doubtless thy Charlie has told thee about thy farm. Although our father pled on thy behalf, thy uncle could not be moved. Thus our father put down the purchase price himself, as he has 4 sons and not enough land for us all. I have spoken with thy Charlie. He has urged me to put aside my fears and speak my heart plain, which is that I long to earn from our father the deed to thy farm, yet thy land would be barren without thee. May I dare ask thee to return, not as sister, but as wife. Forgive these bold words, but I know not how to fashion pretty phrases fit for such as thee. In all respect, thy friend, Luke Stevens." What had Charlie said to the man to make him dare write such a letter? Do they think they can buy me? Do they think I will sell myself for that land? That land I have no one to take to any more? I have nothing left but me, Lyddie Worthen. Do they think I will sell her? I will not be a slave, nor will I be his freight, some homeless fugitive that Luke Stevens must bend down his lofty Quaker soul to rescue. She tore the letter into tiny bits and stuffed every shred of it into Miss Bedloe's iron cook stove, and then, to her own amazement, burst into tears.